The days went by, and things continued on as they were. Connie spent most of her time cleaning up the house, and her rude husband spent most of his time ordering her around. It was just how it used to be before the crash. Toby never really left his room. He would sit by his bed and tremble. His mind would wander, but his thoughts changed too fast to be remembered. He would pace around his small room like a caged animal, or stare out the window. The unhealthy cycle continued. Connie continued to be pushed around by her husband, being way too submissive to him, and Toby remained in his room. Before he could think twice, he would begin to chew on his hands, tearing the flesh from his fingers. He would gnaw his hands until they bled. When his mother walked in on him while he was doing so, she reacted horribly. She rushed him downstairs and grabbed the first aid, wrapping his hands in it. She demanded that he wouldn't leave her sight from them. He isolated himself so much that he grew to hate being around others. His memory grew glitchy as well. He'd start missing memory of minutes, hours, days, and so on. He would begin talking nonsense, about things completely unrelated to conversations he would have. He'd go off about seeing things, sharks in his sink as he washed the dishes, hearing crickets in his pillows, and seeing ghosts outside his bedroom window. All the nonsense landed him in a counselor's office. His mother grew too anxious about his mental health. She decided it would be good for him to talk to a professional about what he was feeling. Connie walked Toby into the building, holding his hand and guiding him in. She walked him up to the front desk and began talking to the lady who sat behind it. "Mrs. Rogers?" the lady asked. "Yes, that's me." Connie nodded. "We're here to see Dr. Oliver. I'm here with Toby Rogers." "Yes, right this way." The lady stood up and led them down a long hallway. Toby looked at the framed artwork down the halls and tuned into the sound of the lady's high heels on the hardwood floor. She opened the door to a room with a table and 2 chairs. "If we can get him to sit in here for a few minutes, I'll get the doctor." She smiled and held the door open. Toby stumbled into the room and sat down at the table. He looked over at his mother and the lady before the door slowly shut behind them. He looked around the room before he held up his tightly bandaged hands and began to bite at the bandages to unwrap his hands, but was interrupted as the door swung open and a young woman in a black and white spotted dress and light blonde hair stepped in, holding a clipboard and a pen. "Toby?" she asked with a smile. Toby looked up at her and nodded. "Nice to meet you, Toby. My name is Dr. Oliver." She put her hand out for him to shake but hesitantly pulled away when she noticed his bandaged hands. "Oh?" She smiled nervously before clearing her throat and sitting in the chair across the table from him. "So I'm going to ask you a few questions. Try to answer them as honestly as possible, okay?" She placed her clipboard down on the table. Toby nodded slowly and held his restrained hands in his lap.
"How old are you, Toby?" 17, he responded quietly. She wrote that down on the paper that was clipped to the clipboard. "What is your full name?" "Toby Aaron Rogers." "What is your birthday?" "April 28th. "Who is your immediate family?" Toby paused for a minute before answering her question. "My mom, my dad, and—" He stopped, "and my sister." "I heard about your sister, dear. I'm really sorry." Her expression faded into a sad, pity-filled look. Toby nodded. "Do you remember anything from the crash, Toby?" Toby looked away from her. His mind went blank for a moment. He looked down at his lap, and in the surrounding, he heard a faint ringing sound. His eyes widened and he froze in his place. "Toby?" the counselor asked. "Toby, are you listening?" Toby felt a shiver go down his spine until he froze once again and slowly looked over out the little window through the door, where he saw it. A dark featureless figure, peering in at him. He stared, eyes widened, the ringing growing louder and louder until suddenly the loud voice of the counselor broke his trance. "Toby," she yelled. Toby jumped and fell sideways out of his chair and back up into the corner. Dr. Oliver stood up, holding her clipboard to her chest, a surprised look in her eyes. Toby met her eyes again, his breath hitching as he twitched.